Welcome to the African Law Seminar on Democracy and Good Governance in Africa. The fourth lecture on the African Peer Review Mechanism will be given by Advocate Batlokoa Makong, Advisor to the CEO of the APRM Continental Secretariat. It is my pleasure to give you the floor.
No, thank you very much, my dear good sister. And allow me to recognize Honorable Judge Abdul Gaye Yusuf, former President of the International Court of Justice, Honorable Judge Ben Kiyoko, former Vice President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, fellow colleagues from the African Union Commission, Dr. John Goddi, and my sister Abitata Tianga Bari, my dear good sisters Virginia and Caroline, the conveners of this important African law lecture series, our distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the African Peer Review Continental Secretariat Chief Executive Officer, Ambassador Marie Antoinette Rose Quatre, I kindly wish to convey our Pan-African greetings to you, distinguished participants of this auspicious 2025 African Law Seminar on Democracy and Good Governance. Perhaps before addressing the topic, the APRM and the promotion of democracy and good governance on the continent, to briefly explain how the idea of establishing the APRM originated, I thought it prudent to narrate the historical context because of the May 2000 article by The Economist magazine, which was a cover story, which was titled Africa, the Hopeless Continent. Because of the persuasiveness and influence of The Economist in policy circles around the world at the time, and the prevailing Afro-pessimism also at the time, that a region, that the African continent was riddled with problems of good governance, instability, wars, and economic development. African heads of state and government accelerated efforts towards the transformation of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, into the African Union by adopting its Constitutive Act in July 2000 in Lome, Togo, and the ratification of the Constitutive Act by member states and the launch and operationalization of the AU in Durban in July 2002. The OAU, you'll recall, was established in May 1963, and it focused mainly on ending colonialism and promoting cooperation amongst African states. On the other hand, the AU is a more ambitious body aimed at greater political and economic integration, with a stronger mandate on human rights, protection, promotion of democracy and good governance and socioeconomic development. And also it is more people-centric, and also has it also adheres to, as one of its cardinal principles, the principle of non-indifference and intervention in internal affairs of member states. So we've got the principle of non-indifference and the intervention in the internal affairs of member states in grave circumstances, namely if there are war crimes, crimes against humanity, and if there is genocide. So before the AU was operationalized, the OAU heads of state and government in Lusaka, Zambia, in 2001, at their last meeting as the OAU, decided to establish the new partnership for Africa's development to drive the socio-economic development of the continent. However, our heads of state and government soon realized that socio-economic development and sustainable development could not be realized without the promotion of democracy and good governance. It is for this reason, distinguished participants, that, no, we're still on the first slide, on the first slide. We're still on the first slide. It is for these reasons, distinguished participants, that the APRM was established on 9th March 2003 in Abuja, Nigeria, by the NAPAT heads of state and government as a self-monetary instrument voluntarily acceded to by member states of our union. So because it's a voluntary mechanism, there are 44 out of 55 AU member states that have acceded to the APRM as participating states. The APRM is an African-led, African-owned, and African-led platform for self-assessment, peer learning, and experience sharing with the purpose of promoting democratic governance, high economic growth, sustainable development, and accelerated regional and continental economic integration. The APRM fulfills this mandate through country reviews and assessments. Next slide, please. So since 2017, the AU heads of state and government have expanded the mandate of the APRM to include the following: to monitor and track the implementation of key governance areas on the continent in relation to democracy and good governance, to prepare the Africa Governance Report, in collaboration with AGA, Africa Governance Architecture, and present it to the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government. I'd like to note, to emphasize that we have prepared 4 reports, the Africa Governance Report. The first one was a baseline report on the state of governance on the continent. The second report was on governance futures for Agenda 2063. The third report, which is most important, that we produced was on unconstitutional changes of government, the Africa Governance Report 2023 on unconstitutional changes of government. And this year, 2025, we produced another Africa Governance Report focusing on natural resources governance. And also, the APRM has been established, next slide, to support member states in the field of credit rating agencies. So you are all aware, distinguished participants, that the field of international credit ratings is dominated by the 3 international rating agencies, mainly Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and Moody. And we have been given a mandate to support our member states when this international credit rating agencies engaged our member states. And I can reveal that we are in the process of establishing the African Union Credit Rating Agency, the Africa Credit Rating Agency, that will be launched next year. We have also been given a mandate to contribute to early warning for conflict prevention on the continent, working very closely with the African Peace and Security Architecture and the Africa Governance Architecture. Lastly, we have been given a mandate to implement ACDEC, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, and most importantly, the mandate to promote democracy and good governance on the continent. So this is overall mandate that we have been given as the APRM by the AU heads of state and government. And this mandate is clearly articulated in our statute that was adopted in February 2020 during the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government. Next slide, please. So how do we assess governance? We assess governance. Originally, our mandate was to assess governance in 4 thematic areas. So it was democracy and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, and socio-economic development. But after the COVID pandemic, we have been given a mandate to also include assessing governance on the state resilience to shocks and disasters. And this year, 2025, we have been given a mandate to assess governance the sixth thematic area is e-governance that we have been given this year. Next slide. So the principles that guide our work as the APRM are the following: political commitment and national ownership. And I'd like to emphasize that we are one of the few, if not the only, mechanism in the AU that has national structures. And when you talk about the national structures, we are talking about the national secretariat in each and every member state. We have a national secretariat of the APRM, and that national secretariat serves what you call the National Governing Council of the APRM. So the National Governing Council is an all-inclusive council that includes all key stakeholders as far as the promotion of good governance and democracy is concerned. So we also have the focal point in each and every member state, who is usually at the level of a minister. And that focal point reports to the head of state and government. That's the head of state and government is the one that has the overall responsibility of the APRM. And we also work with research institutions and universities to enhance our work. So the other principle is credibility, and the other principle is public participation, and the last one is transparency. So these are the core, cardinal, and sacrosanct principles of the APRM. Next slide, please. So I've already talked about the mandate of the APRM as it has been given to us by our heads of state and government, with the country reviews and assessments as our core mandate as the APRM. Next slide, please. So I have already indicated that we have 44 member states of the AU that have joined the APRM. So from North Africa, we've got Algeria, Egypt, Mauritania, and Tunisia that are members of the APRM. Then we have Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, Burkina Faso, Mali, Sierra Leone, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Niger, Togo, and the Gambia. These are countries from West Africa. From Southern Africa, we have Mozambique, South Africa, Lesotho, Zambia, Angola, Botswana, Malawi, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. And in East Africa, we've got Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Mauritius, Tanzania, Sudan, Seychelles, Burundi, and the Comoros. And from Central Africa, we've got Chad, Cameroon, Congo Republic, DRC, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Sao Tome and Principe, and Central Africa Republic. All those member states that you see in red are countries that have undertaken, all the countries that you see in blue are countries that have completed the first generation country review of the APRM. And the countries that you see in red are those that have completed the second generation review report of the APRM. And those that have been underlined are countries that have completed what you call a targeted review on a particular thematic area of the APRM. I think Lesotho also has completed a targeted review of the APRM, and also the other country that has completed the targeted review is Guinea, the Republic of Guinea, although they have not yet become a member of the APRM. They did a targeted review on unconstitutional change of government. Next slide, please. So these are the countries of the APRM in terms of the years and the number of reviews that they have undertaken. And I can reveal today that Sao Tome and Principe, we did a targeted review on tourism earlier last month, and we did a targeted review on Zimbabwe earlier last month, towards the end of last month, on economic governance and management. As we speak, we've got a mission in Sierra Leone doing a comprehensive review, the second review of Sierra Leone. And next year we'll be undertaking a review in Egypt on administrative reforms. Next slide, please. So with all these reviews and assessments, the APRM peer review country reviews have identified serious governance deficits in all peer-reviewed member states. The reports have highlighted a range of early warning indicators that signal potential governance challenges and conflict-related risks across the continent. These reports emphasize that failure by member states to implement APRM recommendations can escalate tensions, undermine stability, and contribute to social unrest or violent conflicts. The indicators also highlighted as potential triggers for unrest include political instability, such as tensions over election processes, unconstitutional changes of government, restrictions on political participation, on economic vulnerabilities, include high unemployment rates, income inequality, unsustainable debt levels, and on social factors, we have ethnic and religious tensions, human rights violations, and weak rule of law, further contributing to instability. Additionally, governance-related issues like corruption, lack of judicial independence, weak public institutions, media suppression have also been highlighted in all our review reports. The APRM reports also have identified security threats, including rise of extremist groups, cross-border conflicts, and inadequate responses to climate change and related displacements. Next slide, please. So we have done a number of reviews. I think we have 26 reviews that we have undertaken in some of our member states. So, but I would like to focus on the country review reports of Zambia, the one that was peer reviewed in 2025. Niger was peer reviewed in 2023, South Africa 2022, Nigeria 2022, Namibia 2022, Liberia 2021, Egypt 2020, Mozambique 2021, Uganda 2018, and Kenya 2017, and Sudan both 2017 and 2021. Those are our recent reports, and in 2021, we did a governance gap analysis for Sudan. So in scrutinizing the APRM country review reports of the member states that I've just mentioned, the following structural and dynamic factors have been identified as triggers of conflicts. The first in the category is socioeconomic inequality. So we have identified widespread, the reports have identified widespread economic disparities, unemployment, poverty, exacerbated by social tensions, and increased susceptibility to conflict. And this affects most of the member states identified in the report. For instance, in the country review report of Nigeria has highlighted the causes of conflict, which include inequality of distribution of resources amongst regions. Stakeholders have informed the country review mission in Nigeria that sovereign states, which are the producers of wealth for the whole country, do not get equal share of their national cake with the northern states, which is a source of discontent among states of the southern region in Nigeria. It is just a classical example of something that emanated from the report. Next slide, please. So on political contestation and governance deficits, electoral disputes, political exclusion, and governance weaknesses have been identified as fueling instability in some countries like Liberia, Mozambique, Zambia, Uganda, and Niger, political contestation and governance deficits manifest through electoral disputes, restricted political freedoms, weak institutional accountability, tensions over constitutional amendments, often leading to instability, public unrest, and challenges to democratic consolidation. I think the classical example is Niger, where we witnessed an unconstitutional change of government recently. So the country review reports have confirmed that electoral processes and management of elections, especially electoral controversy, remain key triggers for violence. And in this regard, limited efforts have been made to take the necessary steps to avoid pre- and post-election conflicts. So our country review report of Mozambique, which was peer-reviewed before the country went into elections this year, confirmed that electoral processes and management of elections, especially electoral controversy, remain key triggers for violence. And in this regard, limited efforts have been made to take the necessary steps to avoid pre- and post-election conflicts in Mozambique. I think you are all aware of what transpired in Mozambique following the elections this year. So next slide, please. So on service delivery failures, poor public service provision in sectors like water, electricity, and housing has led to protest and social unrest. The classical example, the country review report of Namibia found that there's a rise in perceptions regarding ethnicity, tribalism, and regionalism in service delivery and access to resources as potential source for conflict in the country. So on ethnic and religious tensions, in countries like Uganda, Liberia, Nigeria, and Niger, ethnic and religious divisions have been exploited for political and economic gain, highlighting the risk for conflict. This comes from the report. And in the country review report of Niger in particular, it noted that the lack of social justice and lack of sense of national solidarity are the main causes of the demands of certain ethnic minorities, such as the Tuareg and the Fulani. Social injustices are amplified by the context of the economic crisis in which the country finds itself. On xenophobic and community-based violence, the country review report of South Africa and Namibia have revealed that both countries experienced tensions driven by economic competition and perceptions of foreign nations taking over local jobs. The country, in particular, the country review report of South Africa observed racism and xenophobia, particularly against Black Africans, as a potential conflict issue. This issue remains a threat to the stability of the country, and it has not only instigated internal uprisings, but has also led to rupturing relationship between South Africa and other African countries, whose nations have become targets of racist and xenophobic attacks. So on corruption and weak public institutions, governance challenges and corruption weaken public trust and legitimacy, increasing social discontent, and this issue affects most of the countries that have been peer-reviewed. The classical example is the country review report of Nigeria, confirmed that corruption is said to have permeated every aspect of Nigerian institution, and according to most of the non-state actors the country review mission interacted with, this issue of corruption, it is also being acknowledged that nothing can be done without offering a bribe in Nigeria. That's what emanates from the report. And the 2020 APRM Index on African Governance ranked Nigeria 45.5 out of 100, meaning that corruption situation in the country has not improved. So next slide, please. It's getting worse. Next slide, please. Oh, our environment, the previous slide. Environmental and climate-related conflicts, water scarcity and land disputes, and climate-induced displacement are emerging threats in several countries, including Egypt, Mozambique, and Uganda. In particular, the country review report of Egypt found that the River Nile, vital to Egypt's survival, as 95% of its population depend on its narrow, fertile strip, could become a source of conflict with neighboring countries like Ethiopia if water resource management, including projects like the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is not handled through diplomatic cooperation and equitable agreements. Youth unemployment and marginalization, high levels of joblessness, and limited economic opportunities for youth have created frustration and increased recruitment into violence-related activities. In particular, the country review report of Kenya found that economic inequality and youth unemployment were identified as crucial early warning signs that could fuel political instability if left unaddressed. The report warned that despite Kenya's economic growth, many people remained excluded from meaningful employment opportunities, leading to frustration and vulnerability to political manipulation. The failure to implement inclusive economic policies and address socioeconomic inequalities and governance challenges have contributed to growing youth discontent, which has been displayed through unprecedented protest led primarily by Generation Z over proposed tax hikes in the Financial Bill 2024. And I can reveal that because of this issue of youth unemployment and marginalization, the next Africa Governance Report 2027 is going to focus on youth unemployment from promise to prosperity. So on crime and insecurity in countries like South Africa, Nigeria, and Liberia, high crime rates and weak law enforcement have exacerbated insecurity. The country review report of Sudan found that the country faces challenges in instituting democratic governance, has faced challenges in instituting democratic governance since independence, which has led to the military interventions and conflicts, and that fractured the national elite and frustrated attempts to forge a national consensus on how the country should be governed. So you are all aware of the current conflict in Sudan is as a result of some of the structural factors that we had identified. So the remaining major conflicts concern the status of Abyei and the boundary between Sudan and South Sudan. In that area, the conflict in Darfur over access to resources and socioeconomic inequalities related to identities. South Kosovan Blue Nile conflict, where negotiations to determine the status of the two states remain inconclusive. Next slide, please. So given those challenges that have been identified, the APRM and review reports have emphasized the importance of enhancing early warning and conflict prevention systems. Key specific recommendations across all these reports include, first of all, to develop national early warning hubs. So member states have been encouraged to establish specialized centers to analyze conflict trends and coordinate responses. The other recommendation is to enhance socioeconomic inclusion. Member states have been encouraged to address inequality through targeted economic empowerment programs, skills development and job creation initiatives. And the other recommendation has been to strengthen electoral integrity and governance stability. Member states have been encouraged to enhance political dialogue, electoral transparency, and inclusivity to reduce political tensions. Next slide, please. So member states have also been asked to implement efficiency-driven reforms to mitigate grievances linked to poor governance, and also strengthen local peace committees, mediation programs, and traditional dispute resolution mechanisms to address community-based conflicts. To tackle xenophobia and ethnic tensions, member states have been encouraged to promote intercultural dialogue, inclusive policies, education programs to counter discrimination and social polarization. And to boost law enforcement and justice systems, member states have been encouraged to improve policing strategies, judicial efficiency, and public trust in legal institutions. And to integrate climate change and conflict prevention strategies, member states have been asked to address climate-based security risks through sustainable. In conclusion, following the findings of the APRM country review reports, it is clear that the mechanism, the APRM plays a central role as an early warning tool for conflict prevention, as it identifies governance deficiencies, socioeconomic inequalities, and political tensions that could escalate into full-blown crisis if left unaddressed. So member states, as we do the findings, we do the recommendations, member states develop what we call the national plans of action. And these national plans of action, they're integrated into the national development plan of the country, and they're budgeted for, and the country is expected to present a progress report to the APRM Forum of Heads of State and Government periodically, so as to assess the state of implementation of the findings of our reviews. So I would also like to highlight that the APRM, unlike other reviews and assessments that are done worldwide by different multilateral institutions, the APRM country review reports are the only institution in the entire world where the country review report is peer reviewed at the level of heads of state and government. And that thing in itself, it shows the ownership at the highest level of our governments on the continent. I just wanted to highlight that. So by assessing governance risks and recommending corrective measures, the APRM provides member states with a roadmap, the national plans of action, to mitigate instability before it manifests into conflict. When member states fail to address APRM peer review findings and implement the recommendations, often this translates into widespread protest, electoral violence, prolonged political unrest, and violent conflicts, as seen in the countries that I've just highlighted. Despite the fact that AU member states have established various early warning mechanisms, there's also existence of such mechanisms at the continent and regional levels. It is important to have regular coordination, inclusivity, and early response to effectively prevent conflicts. So we contribute to early warning for conflict prevention in harmony and synergy with both AGA and APSA by presenting these review reports to the AU Peace and Security Council. I think my brother Dr. John mentioned the AU Peace and Security Council. So we present our peer review reports to the AU Peace and Security Council, and they're filtered down to the AU Continental Early Warning System. We also work hand in hand with the panel of the wise of the AU for preventive diplomacy initiatives. So we don't wait for conflicts to be full-blown, but we work with the AU panel of the WISE, which has a clear mandate on preventive diplomacy, so as to address some of the findings that have been identified in our member states. So enhancing collaboration between the APRM and other AU institutions on the execution of its mandate will ensure that it effectively contributes to identifying and assessing some of the structural root causes of conflicts on the continent, particularly those relating to governance. So we work very closely with the panel of the WISE, the PSC, the Pan-African Parliament, with ECOSOC, and the African Commission on Women and People's Rights, amongst many AU institutions. It should be noted that ignoring APRM recommendations comes at a significant cost, not just in terms of protracted instability and sometimes violent conflict, but also in undermining long-term socioeconomic development. So if you look at our review report of Niger, if the recommendations were implemented, we are certain that we would not have witnessed the unconstitutional change of government that occurred in the country. The same goes for Mali, and also the same goes for South Africa as far as xenophobia is concerned, and the same goes for Kenya for the post-election violence that occurred in 2007, 2008, and Mozambique for the election that occurred this year. So implementing the recommendation of the APRM country review reports enhances Africa's ability to preempt conflicts, strengthen democratic governance, and ensure sustainable peace and prosperity across the continent, in line with our AU Agenda 2063. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. Sabonga. Merci.
Batlokoa, welcome. Thank you so much for that comprehensive and insightful lecture on this important African-owned and African-led mechanism that reflects the values and the traditions of Africa. And it is quite unusual because it is peer-reviewed by Africans for Africans at the highest level, as you mentioned. And that is where change often needs to take place. I also note the impressive, very broad participation of African countries as members of the APRM, which reflects their recognition of the importance of the APRM for promoting democracy and good governance in Africa. The APRM has been entrusted with such a broad mandate for addressing so many factors that affect democracy and good governance in Africa. This is a wonderful holistic approach that increases the chance of really significant changes. And the new mandates that have been entrusted to the APRM are a further indication of the African countries' support for and trust in your institution. We have several questions, so if you are ready, we will begin. The first question: what role has been played by the APRM to curtail constitutional amendments by some presidents asking for a third term in their country? Batlokoa, the floor is yours to answer this question.
No, thank you very much. I think it's the same question that was asked. I think was it asked my sister Abitata and my brother Dr. John.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's a very, very, very important question. But I would like to state that the AU and the APRM, they are intergovernmental organizations. So they're not supranational entities. So we don't superimpose ourselves. So if you had, when I read the recommendations, I said, urge member states. So we unlike the EU, where in certain instances it can enforce its decisions through certain sanctions if member states do not adhere to certain democratic norms. In the AU, we've got the Constitutive Act that recognizes the democratic norms and popular participation. We've got the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. But in the charter itself, I think there's a provision that only talks about the amendments to the Constitution within a particular time frame. So there's no legal provision that talks about term limits on the continent. So because of the lacuna in our legal instruments, when member states amend our constitution, it becomes very difficult for any AU institution, the Peace and Security Council, the APRM, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the Assembly, to come to really intervene. Say a member states cannot amend the constitution for a president to seek a third term, because there's no specific provision that says the union can intervene in a member state to prevent an amendment of the constitution for a third term. But these are some of the issues that are emerging, I must state. These are some of the issues that are emerging, and I think there was a meeting that I attended. I think Abitata talked about it, and Dr. John, that we attended in Kenya. So there's a review of our governance architecture, our Africa governance architecture. So these are the issues that are also emerging in the conversations that we are having internally within the AU, the issue of term limits and the issues of amendments, because sometimes the issue is not an amendment for a third term. A country can amend a constitution for a president to move from being a president to a prime minister, with the executive powers now moving from the presidency to the prime minister. So we don't have a specific provision, but these are issues that have been discussed internally within the union.
Your colleague Abi Bata mentioned this as well, and many participants asked about the possibility of the AU establishing some type of even soft guidelines for both the constitutions and for the national laws relating to elections. So I understand that this is something that the AU is certainly aware of and is working on, and we all look forward to seeing more progress in the future. If I may turn to the second question, please. Well, first of all, I want to thank the participant who has followed the lectures from day one. So thank you very much. The comment is as follows. Africa has done a lot in terms of institutional settings. Yet, when you look around and find African leaders who have been in power for more than 10 years, some even were champions of the Organization of African Unity and carried on with the African Union, irrespective of the so-called particular circumstances that can justify the leaders' overstay in power. What message do you have for these leaders? And can you share this message with the participants? So what would you say to the leaders? I know that there are restrictions on speaking to heads of state, et cetera, but what would be your views? What is your view? What would you say if you could about the overstay of power?
No, thank you very much. Like I've said, there's no provision in any of the AU legal instruments and decisions that have been adopted by our policy organs on the issue of term limits. Like I've said, but it's an issue that there are different schools of thought around it. But I would like to address the issue of term limits in particular, to state that if you look at the United States of America, since independence, they've never had any term limits till President Roosevelt was elected for a third term. They never had any term limits. So, but luckily, almost invariably, all presidents before Roosevelt in the 40s had served 1 or 2 terms, not more than 2 terms. So, but they never had any term limits. The UK, which has parliamentary democracy, does not have any term limits. So does Germany, does not have any term limits. I'm just making classical examples of countries in the West. But where did the issue of term limits come from? As legal scholars, that's what we should be asking ourselves. Where does the issue of term limits originate? Where do they originate? So I would tell and say that the issue of term limits originated in the US after President Roosevelt Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected for a 3rd term. So it had never happened in the US history until President Roosevelt was elected for a 3rd term. And the establishment in the US decided, no. The foundational principles of the US Constitution were such that they didn't want a monarch, somebody that will rule forever. So they went to the foundational principles of their own constitution. They said, we fought against the British monarch. We did not want a dictator. We did not want anybody that could rule forever. So they came and introduced term limits after that election. Luckily, President Roosevelt passed away on his 3rd term. So in the 80s, you remember in the 80s, my sister Virginia, if you would go to the 80s, 90s, during the Cold War, if you go to the AU summit, you would find majority, 80% of presidents there in military fatigue or military uniforms. So we had military dictators on one or the other that were in charge of most of our member states. But with the end of the Cold War and the ushering of democratic dispensation in the 90s, and of course, it went hand in hand with the introduction of what you call the structural adjustments policies of the IMF and the World Bank. One of the issues that came up with that in terms of political reforms that were member states were supposed to undertake in the 90s was that they have to ensure that in their own constitutions, we have term limits. So what our leaders, most of them, was just to put away the military fatigue or uniform, put on a suit, contest elections. But the culture of democracy was not yet entrenched in most of our member states. That's why after 10 years, most of them went back to amend their constitutions, because an amendment to a constitution is a sovereign will of the people. So we have to understand it from that angle. Is the sovereign will of the people, and it is in line with the current norm of the country, which is the constitution. So I'm just putting all the schools of thought to put all these perspectives in the basket, so that when we discuss the issue of term limits, we understand it from a historical context, and we also understand it that even in the developed countries that are deemed to be democratic, the issue of term limits for those that have been elected who have executive power in the member states is not yet entrenched as we speak. So I'm putting all this to say, in a nutshell, there's no legal provision that talks about term limits, but it's something that is being discussed from various legal schools of thought and political schools of thought within the Union.
Thank you for that very useful historical background to this question of term limits. Your colleague, Abibata, talked about the importance of promoting the culture of democracy in Africa. And it's interesting, Ben Kioko, when he gave his lecture on Monday, he referred to a speech given at the African Union by Barack Obama, the former president of the United States. And he gave credit to George Washington and to Nelson Mandela for recognizing the importance of stepping down. And Barack Obama said something to the effect that if the head of state is not ready to step down and hand over power peacefully, he has perhaps not prepared the next generation. The other thing that sometimes people may not be aware of is that after the American Revolution, the country was uh, in very uncharted waters. And there were many people who wanted George Washington to be the emperor, and he said no. And there's also a current movement in my own country, as you may know, it's No More Kings movement. So this is an issue in many countries, and the reason it came up with FDR was because he became so seriously ill. But many people believe he got my country through the Depression. He got us through the Second World War, which is why they didn't want to change. But after that, yes, you're absolutely right. So let me continue with the next question. I believe that among the fundamentals of ensuring good governance is achieving social development and prosperity, and thereby ensuring the stability of constitutional governments. Consequently, this prevents any pretext of deteriorating social conditions from being used to claim that governments are corrupt and weak. This in turn guarantees the non-interference of foreign entities in the conduct of governance, which would otherwise serve the interests of the intervening states and organizations. You have addressed these issues to a certain extent, but perhaps you would like to comment on the link between social development and democracy, and also the importance of guaranteeing non-interference by foreign entities.
No, thank you very much. I think the question is very pertinent because from most of our analysts, they seem to understand democracy from one angle, which is electoral democracy. So contestation of power by political parties or political elites from electoral angle. But democracy is not only about elections. It's about ensuring a better life for the people, about ensuring socioeconomic development for the country, about ensuring prosperity for all citizens. And I think countries in the West, the US, in Japan, in Korea, and in Western Europe, and to a large extent in some of our countries on the continent, they have now started to understand democracy to mean that we have to ensure a better life, prosperity for all citizens, and socioeconomic development and sustainable development of the country. So in order to achieve that, you need strong institutions. You need very strong democratic institutions. And we need also to ensure the integrity of elections, but most importantly, to ensure the integrity of those that contest for state power, either as individuals or as political entities, political parties in particular. Because these are entities that would produce leaders that will be running our countries. So now at the moment, I think with the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063, the focus is on institutions and ensuring that we have transformative leaders in our countries, not just about the elections and observing elections that they were free, fair, and credible. So we have to address issues of poverty, issues of unemployment, issues of rapid urbanization, issues of extremism, and issues of socioeconomic development, inclusion, marginalization, and etc. So we are now focused as a union through the second 10 implementation plan in addressing these issues so that we have what we've got, meaningful and gainful democracy. And in terms of what you call interference by foreign forces, it's very easy if for any foreign power, either your neighbor or foreign powers outside of the continent, to interfere in internal affairs, if first of all, you don't have very strong institutions. So if you don't have very strong institutions, you don't have very strong transformative leaders that have been elected to serve the interest of the people, not their own interest, and those of their own families and friends, then it becomes very difficult for any country to interfere. So because we have policies and laws that run institutions, including the institution of the office of the president. And we have checks and balances between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature.
Very good. Thank you. The next question is about the types of reports requested by and submitted to the APRM. Why are some countries submitting targeted reports and other countries different types of reports? Is there a mechanism or schedule which dictates which countries must submit which type of reports, and what is the determining factors thereof?
No, it's very important. So in terms of our processes, so a country, once it joins the APRM, it's supposed to, within 18 months, to undertake a comprehensive review. On the 6 thematic areas that I had outlined. So then after 18 months, the report is peer reviewed, then the country is supposed to produce progress reports to the APRM Forum of Heads of State and Government. And also to mention that the APRM Forum of Heads of State and Government is a subcommittee of the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government. So their report go to the AU Assembly and they're adopted, considered and adopted. Then after 4 years, the country is supposed to undertake another second generation review, a comprehensive review. But experience, this is what the legal framework provides. But the experience has shown that certain countries, when they join the APRM, are still skeptical about the processes. They think we'll be revealing too much to our neighbors, to be revealing too much in terms of our weaknesses to the international community and to the AU. So then they will say, no, let's test the processes of the APRM by undertaking a targeted review so that they have confidence in the process and the methodology that we use to undertake the review itself. I'll make the classical example of Namibia. So Namibia, once it joined the APRM, they undertook a targeted review on youth unemployment, just to have confidence in our methodology. Then immediately thereafter, they undertook a comprehensive review of the entire country on I think back then there were still 4 thematic areas. But in terms of the provisions of our legal instruments, the country is supposed to undertake the first review. Then in between the first review and the second review or the third review, they can do a targeted review or any thematic area that it's. But in practice, countries have decided sometimes to start with a targeted review just to have confidence in the processes and the methodology. Example of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, they are now undertaking a review on economic management, on economic governance and management before they start to undertake a comprehensive review. I don't know if I've answered.
Yes, that's very interesting. I think it's interesting on the part of the member states that they are willing to adopt a step-by-step approach, to start with maybe a partial report to become familiar with the process and to have their faith in the organization confirmed. I would imagine that these reports are fairly comprehensive and may be somewhat difficult to prepare, especially the first time. Does the APRM offer technical support to states, particularly those who are preparing their reports for the first time? Is this an option?
No, thank you very much. Perhaps to indicate that, to just highlight the review process, how it works. So first of all, we do basic research as a secretariat, as a continental secretariat. So if we're undertaking a country review in my own country, in Lesotho, we'll do a basic research as the continental secretariat on the 6 thematic areas. So we've got experts in the secretariat on the 6 thematic areas that we'll be doing at the base research. So as we are doing the base research on the country, then the country itself undertakes what we call a self-assessment. So they do a self-assessment on the 6 thematic areas, assisted by a technical research institution that the country has identified. So in most countries, they would identify a university or a think tank to assist them in the self-assessment process. So they do the self-assessment. After they do the self-assessment, us in the secretariat, we do the base research on the country. Then when the self-assessment is done, we deploy what we call a country review mission. So this country review mission is not led by staff from the secretariat, but is led by a member of the panel of eminent persons. So this panel of eminent persons is elected by the forum and endorsed by the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government. And there are 10 member states of this, 10 members of this panel of eminent persons that are elected, and it's 10, 2 from each region, and we have gender equality in the membership. So these eminent persons are supposed to ensure the credibility of the review process. They go to the country, engage with all the stakeholders using both our base research in the Continental Secretariat and the self-assessment that has been undertaken. And they are assisted by experts. We've got an external expert that we recruit, international expert, to assist the panel member. And also the country also identifies an expert to work with the panel member. Then we've got different experts in different thematic areas to assist the panel member. So do we assist countries to undertake the self-assessment? Yes, we do, in instances where the country wants to undertake the self-assessment, but because of budgetary constraints, it cannot do that. As a Continental Secretariat, we check the resources that we have, then we normally assist. But the self-assessment itself, in terms of our own legal framework, is supposed to be undertaken by the country at its own cost, so that it shows national ownership of the process.
That is an extraordinary partnership between the APRM, the national authorities, and independent eminent experts. So that would certainly bode well for the success of these exercises and the trust that would be placed in them. The next question relates to compliance. What are the strategies or mechanisms put in place by the APRM to ensure that good governance and policies adopted by the member states are respected, in line with APRM's purpose to promote good governance in Africa?
Thank you. Thank you very much. These are tough questions.
The participants always ask tough questions.
Yes. No, I think this is also a very important question. I would like to reveal that from 2003, when the APRM was established, to 2023, 20 years of the operationalization of the APRM, we had left it to member states to, once we have done the recommendations, member states to implement the policies and the recommendations and the findings of the country review reports. But we realized, now most of our recommendations are not being implemented. Our good governance policies and recommendations are not being implemented by member states. So in 2024, we did what we call the a study on the impact of the APRM, the APRM impact study, to assess the status of implementation of our recommendations. And the study revealed that most of our member states have not implemented most of our important and structural recommendations. And this has contributed to the declining or the governance challenges that we are currently facing. So we decided to establish what we call the APRM Governance Support Program. APRM Governance Support Program. And our heads of state and government and the AUs adopted the APRM Governance Support Program as a result of our own audit, our own assessment of the impact of the APRM. So we have developed the legal instruments of the Governance Support Program, and they are going to be considered next week by the AU Specialized Technical Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs, and probably adopted in February. So this governance support program is supposed to, once a country has undertaken a review, then the APRM will assist the country to implement what we call the accelerators, the low-hanging fruits, which is some of the issues that have been identified in the recommendations. Low-hanging fruits like, so on the issue of xenophobia, to hold dialogues across the country, to highlight issues of social cohesion and inclusivity. So those are low-hanging fruits. So we'll be assisting countries to address such low-hanging fruits, and also to assist countries to undertake the necessary national reforms as a result of recommendations of the APRM process. So if, for example, a country, they said no, because of this post-election, the issues of integrity of elections, they are supposed to amend your electoral law. So we'll be sending an expert in the country to assist the country to amend the electoral laws, and also to effect the necessary policies to ensure that the country addresses the issue of election integrity of elections. So we have this program, and this program is going to be financed by the APRM member states through their own areas to the APRM to the tune of $18 million. And we're also going to get support from APRM member states and AU member states in terms of voluntary contributions. And I think Algeria gave us 1 million this year. So we are also going to get contribution from our development partners to really support member states. And the current strategic plan of the APRM, led by Ambassador Rose Quatre, is to ensure that we implement our mandate with impact and tangible results. So we no more talk about report this, report that. We have to be going to Nigeria, we're going to Niger, we're going to Uganda, Liberia, Zambia, South Africa, Kenya, to ensure that we assist the countries to implement the identified findings and recommendations. So in the next 2 years, I can assure you that you'd find a different APRM, an APRM that is on the ground, assisting member states to address governance challenges and to ensure implementation of governance policies and recommendations.
It is impressive that the APRM is such a dynamic institution, and that it is engaged not only in working with member states to evaluate their progress and suggest changes, but is also constantly evaluating its own impact and making changes to increase its practical benefits on the ground for the peoples of Africa. This is not very common in the international organizations that I've been familiar with. Bureaucracies often do not move this quickly, but I think that is very encouraging that there is this kind of a dynamic element, and there is a focus on practical benefits. And the fact that you are getting funding not only from primarily and most importantly from African countries, but also supplemented by others, that is a strong indication of respect, support for your organization, and recognition of its importance. So it sounds like things are quite encouraging. The next question, please. Thank you for the insightful examples that you shared. I noticed that most of them focused on governance challenges in mainland African countries. I would appreciate your perspective on how these challenges compare to those faced by SIDS, such as Seychelles and Mauritius, in your view. What are the key governance challenges SIDS encounter in striving to institute good governance, and are these similar to those experienced on the African mainland?
No, thank you very much. We have developed our CEO, Her Excellency Ambassador Mary Antoinette Rose comes from Seychelles. So under her able leadership, we have introduced a specific program to look at our island member states because they've got peculiar challenges that the rest of the mainland Africa are not faced with. So that's why we're doing a targeted review report on Sao Tome, on tourism this year. We also did a targeted review report on Comoros on unconstitutional changes of government. So the examples that I highlighted was just some of the countries that, because we have done 26, we have 26 review reports. So I could not take all of them. I just highlighted the recent ones. Perhaps I could have included Comoros and Mauritius. But we do understand that our island states, including Madagascar, although Madagascar is not yet an APRM member state, they are faced with peculiar challenges that some of the AU member states from the African mainland are not faced with. So we are developing a program to ensure that we do undertake the necessary reviews, targeted reviews. We've started with Sao Tome. I think this year will also be in Seychelles. I met with the CEO and myself. We met with the Vice President of Seychelles on the margins of the Africa-EU summit in Rwanda just a couple of days back. We're in Mauritius. We're engaging with authorities in Mauritius. So some of the challenges that these countries are faced with, we are quite aware, and we're going to engage them with a specific program to address some of the governance challenges that these countries are facing that may not be very similar to what other countries from mainland Africa are faced with.
Very good. Thank you. The next question also relates to implementation. You have answered this to a certain extent, but I would like to go ahead and read the question and see if you have any additional comments that you would like to add. Given the unique governance challenges and integration priorities within Southern African member states of the APRM, how does the current APRM draft strengthen mechanisms for ensuring the peer review recommendations are not only adopted, but effectively implemented at the national level, particularly in areas such as electoral governance, public sector accountability, and citizen participation?
No, thank you very much. So one of the issues that we emerged on the APRM impact study that we undertook, in fact, the study was adopted by our focal points and ultimately our Forum of Heads of State and Government this year, 2024. So one of the issues that we identified is that for almost 20 years plus, we have not been working effectively with regional economic communities. We have not been, because the regional economic communities are closer to our member states. So, but we have not been working very closely with them. So we have signed an MOU with COMESA. COMESA is the biggest regional economic community, to ensure that the review reports, if, for example, Zambia is a member of COMESA. So the recommendations that emanate from the review report of Zambia, we work with COMESA to ensure their implementation, working also very close to the national authorities. We're in the process of signing the MOU with SADC with a similar arrangement, and we are in negotiations with ECOWAS and also with IGAD, so that we bring the APRM closer to member states, but we also work with mechanisms that are already working with those member states to ensure socio-economic development and political stability and security in those members, so that there's no duplication of effort. So it's something that after our own audit of our impact, we have started to ensure that we've come very closer to our member states. And in terms of our own member states, we have realized that in as much as our legal provisions state that member states are supposed to have this national structures, the national secretariat, the national governing councils, some of these institutions exist in name only, and some of them are not inclusive. So under the able leadership of Excellency Ambassador Marian Janet Rose-Quatri, we are also undertaking another audit to assess the effectiveness of our national structures on all the 44 member states. Because sometimes the structures are there in name only. So you go to a country, you meet the chairperson, and you think that the National Governing Council is there. But in fact, the chairperson, he is the secretariat, he is the council himself. But that cannot be in law and in practice. So we are working with member states to assess which countries have structures, which countries have effective structures, and which countries are supposed to be assisted to have effective structures. And this is one of the key priority areas of our strategic plan 2025-2028. So we are working in member states, we are working regionally, we are also working continentally. At the continental level, we are working very close to the African Union Commission, Department for Political Affairs and Peace and Security. We are working with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. We have recently signed an MOU, I think in July, with the Pan-African Parliament. We are working with NEPAD to ensure that as we go to our member states, we go as one. As we do the reviews, we go as one. As we implement the recommendations, we implement the recommendations as one. We do away with the issue of silo mentality.
This is a very important development, not only in terms of avoiding duplication, but in terms of uniform standards and working together. And the collaboration of these entities will certainly strengthen your efforts, I believe. If I could return to something that you mentioned in the early part of your statement and that you have referred to recently, you've mentioned that there are national secretariats. And this is something that some of the lecturers have referred to this week, the fact that democracy and good governance can be supported at the African level, but real results must occur at the national level. How can people, the participants, find out about the national secretariats in their countries? Are they listed on your website, or I think many of us were not aware of the details of the APRM, and I'm thinking that perhaps many participants are not aware of the APRM National Secretariat in their countries. How can they find out about this?
No, thank you very much. Is even me too, if you were to ask me. So I take the example, say, Mauritania, because I've been to many countries, but I've never been to Mauritania. If you ask me, who are members of the NGs, APRM NGs in Mauritania, I will not give the answer.
Fair enough.
But we have done what we have just finalized our communication strategy. So we're going to see the change in the manner in which we communicate with the outside world, including I think you had difficulties accessing certain information from our own website. So we're going to revamp the entire website. We're going to change the way we're communicating, both within ourselves and with the international community and our structures and the people. So this is something that we are working on. So as part of the audit of the national structures, because we have requested all countries to submit to us their national structures. So it's an exercise that is ongoing. We hope to finalize it by January next year. So we're going to have this information, then input the information in our revamped website so that everybody can know that in Lesotho, this is the national chairperson of the National Governing Council. This is how it comes. This is the National Secretariat. The National Secretariat works with this national research institution. And if they see the National Governing Council has not been all-inclusive, then they can ask, why is the National Governing Council not all-in? Why does it not have youth representatives? Why doesn't it have women? Why doesn't it have representatives of civil society and business? Why is it composed of only government agencies and departments? So it's something that we are undertaking, and it's something that comes from our impact study.
You mentioned the importance of citizen participation, and if they can have access to this information about the national structures in their country, this would, of course, greatly facilitate their ability to become engaged. As long as you mentioned updating your website, again, at the beginning of your speech, you mentioned 4 very important reports prepared by the APRM. And one of the lecturers actually referred this week to the one on natural resources, which is something that I'm greatly interested in. Are these reports available on your website, or will they be available in the future?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. No, the country review reports.
No, you mentioned the 4 reports. They were.
Oh yes, the governance reports. Yeah, they are.
The most recent one is on, I believe, natural resources in the extractive industry. I think this is a fairly recent report done by the APRM, and I've heard it's a very important.
If it is not there, then probably they have not yet uploaded, because it was only launched in. Normally, we upload the reports once they have been launched. So it was only recently launched, I think, in August or July. So if it hasn't been uploaded, I'll share the report. But I'll also make sure that before the end of today, it is uploaded so that everybody can access it, because we've got a mandate to ensure. In fact, it's not a mandate, it's a directive to ensure its wider dissemination. Both the AGR 2023, they were all our reports, including the peer review reports. Once they've been launched by the respective countries, they are shared with everybody. They're supposed to be wider dissemination, because it means that their recommendations have been accepted.
That would be wonderful, because, as you know, the internet is an important source of research, as long as we can have access to the internet. And very good. Okay, the next question. First of all, thank you to the participant who says that they are delighted to attend this seminar, which is really important, dealing with themes that are challenging to us all. The question is, how do we promote competencies and new mindsets for the future of governance in Africa?
No, thank you. No, thank you very much. We, as you approached us, I told you one of the areas that we have been engaged with is to ensure that we go on and engage in different lectures to promote good governance on the continent and collaborate with research institutions so that we promote the change of mindset, especially among the scholars, because we believe the scholars are the elite of our countries, but most importantly, to ensure that we communicate far more better with the rest of our our people on the continent in terms of the work that we do. So if we go to a member state, like we'll be going to Lesotho next week on the Southern Africa Intra-Political Party Dialogue. So we'll be having a dialogue with political parties. We have to make sure that we give a significant time to engage with the national broadcasters, with the private media, to put our message out there. So in that way, we are able to change the mindset. But we are very active, and I can attest to the fact that we are one of the very few AU institutions that are very active on social media. So our Facebook page is updated almost daily on different activities that we are there. We're on Instagram, Facebook. We also have our own podcast. So when you're in South Africa, we'd invite you to our office to come to our own podcast so that we do our podcast on YouTube. We usually post it on YouTube. So in that way, it's some of the issues that we are doing. But on the core element of the work that we do, we went to Egypt. In fact, one of the issues that came out of the country review report of Egypt is the merit-based recruitment system that the Egyptian government has. It has no merit. It's the top class on the continent. It has merit. It's top class, the system that they have in terms of recruitment in the civil service, in the public service. So we are trying to encourage other member states in terms of experience sharing, to learn from Egypt in terms of the merit-based recruitment system, in terms of professionalization of the public service. And Sierra Leone is one of the countries that are engaging with the government of Egypt on that. I think the Minister of Sierra Leone for Public Service was there last week or that other week in Egypt in terms of experience sharing. Egypt, they have agreed to undertake further administrative reforms to also improve on the system in terms of ensuring merit-based recruitment system, which is something that is lacking on the continent in terms of a professional public service. And so as to improve the competence and professionalization of our public services across the continent.
Very good. There is an AU instrument on the principles of public service, and I'm hoping to give a lecture on that instrument in the future. Again, I don't think it is very well known. And it's been some time since I read it, but I believe it may deal with some of these things. But this partnership between African countries and helping each other learn from best practices, that seems to be very promising. There is a question that relates to the civil service, the next question. They are wondering if, in your view, the fact that the number of vacant posts across various government ministries has decreased. Could this be a contributing factor to why certain countries are unable to draft and submit their reports to the APRM? I assume that they are referring to staff reductions. It's either staff reductions or vacant posts that are not being filled. Is this an issue in affecting the ability of countries to draft and submit their reports? Do they have sufficient staff?
I think yes, that is very true. The issue of human resources constraints, but also fatigue. Our countries, they report on so many instruments, and you find the same ministries reporting on so many instruments, yet they have limited resources in terms of human resources. So you find that our countries are reporting on the Human Rights Council, then they're reporting on the AU anti-corruption, state reporting. They're doing state reporting on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. They're doing state reporting on various UN instruments. Then the APRM. More or less the same issues most of the time. So you might find that the human resource constraints is a big factor, but also fatigue, reporting fatigue is one of the issues that we have identified. That's why we have advised our member states to say, once we've got the National Governing Council, the APRM National Governing Council, it can assist the countries to also prepare and report on the other various international legal instruments that relate to governance. So you don't have to have so many institutions, you just have one institution, and that institution, in as much as it focuses on the APRM, but it should focus on of good governance, good and effective governance in the country, so that it assists the country to also report on the various international instruments as far as governance is concerned.
Reporting fatigue was something that was also an issue when I was working for the United Nations, especially for the smaller countries that do not have large staffs in their government ministries. And sometimes they would complain that the reporting requests were repetitive. Is there any possibility of consolidating the reports and streamlining them so that rather than member states submitting 10 reports, they could submit fewer reports, but still provide the same information? Would this be helpful?
I think so. The only problem is that we have different reporting guidelines. Different institutions have different reporting guidelines and templates. But when you have
you would have to harmonize. You would have to harmonize the reporting.
Yes.
Well, perhaps an issue for another day. This will be our last question. Somewhat politically sensitive, but here we go. The probability of success of peer reviewing in Africa is suspicious, with a view to taking good lessons in the areas of good governance, rule of law, and respect for human rights. They are good at sharing how to stay long in power and how to protect impunity. For instance, we can take what African states did in the arrest warrant by the ICC in the case of the former Sudanese president. And I would like to emphasize, I'm reading the questions and views of the participants. I stay out of politics. So would you care to comment on this?
Yes, no, thank you very much. So like I've highlighted, we're the first institution, the entire world, that identified the issue of xenophobia in South Africa. The first one. So if it's suspicious, but we're the first one. We're the first institution that highlighted that the tribal nature of the politics in Kenya before 2007 election, that if the issue is not addressed, it will lead to post-election violence. I talked about Mozambique, and you saw what happened. You look at Niger, you look at our country review report for Niger, it was not launched before the coup, but if you look at the report and look at the reasons that have been articulated as a cause of the review, is exactly what you find in the APRM review report. In my own country, Lesotho, we have had protracted instability. And one of the issues that have caused that instability, that triggered the government to institute the necessary constitutional and the necessary national reforms, are issues that have been highlighted in the APRM review report. So the APRM is the diagnostic tool that identifies both structural, dynamic, and trigger causes of conflicts and also governance challenges in our member states. So factually, it's a fact. So in terms of impunity, addressing impunity, the AU is the only institution, the entire world, that has in its founding instrument the principle of responsibility to protect against grave violations of human rights, namely crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide. It's the only one, the entire world, that has that in its founding instrument, the Constitutive Act. I think it's Article 4H of the Constitutive Act. And the AU has adopted the principle of non-indifference. So it has moved from the absolute adherence to the principle of non-interference to the principle of non-indifference. So if we see that in a country X, certain things are happening that go against the fundamental values and principles of our union, and the union always pronounces itself.
Very
Always
good.
pronounces itself. So, in order to address the issue of Sudan, of the ICC, I know it's something that a lot of people have written about, scholarly, but we have to understand that, first of all, the AU is not a state party to the Rome Statute. That was the first issue. And the second issue is that Sudan had not ratified the what do you call it, the Rome Statute. And the issue of Sudan, as far as the genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes that were committed in Darfur, it was referred to the ICC by the UN Security Council. So it was for the UN Security Council and the ICC to take measures to make sure that the president of Sudan, the President Omar Bashir, is indeed arrested and brought before the ICC. It had nothing to do with the AU. And the AU, because of not being a state party to the ICC, it made certain decisions based on the principles. Then the reasons that were advanced, they said they are basing their decision based on the principles of customary international law as far as immunities and privileges of heads of states was concerned, because there was conflict of laws. There was the customary principles of customary law, international customary law as far as privileges and immunities of heads of state, serving heads of state and government, and the provisions of the ICC statute, the ICC statute of which Sudan was not a state party to. So there was a conflict of laws somewhere there. So I just wanted to state this because I'm talking with legal scholars so that they understand where the union was found itself as far as that issue is concerned. So there was no protection of immunity or of impunity at all.
Thank you for that very informative reply. And thank you for your lecture. And best wishes to everyone at the APRM for allowing you to take the time to prepare your wonderful lecture and to spend time with us, and for answering all of the questions. That is one of the things I really enjoy about this lecture series. The participants are very engaged. They care. And the topics that we discuss are often of great personal interest to them. Your lecture will be made available on our YouTube channel as soon as we can do so. And we will also make your PowerPoint slides available. These are often very useful for universities, for government training centers, for researchers. So we will be adding you to our YouTube channel very soon. And perhaps we could envisage the possibility of a follow-up lecture in a year or two so that we can learn about all the wonderful new advancements that have been made, because you have many interesting things on the horizon. And I think that The Economist should write a new cover story about the wonderful, bright future of Africa. There are so many good people working so hard to fulfill the dreams of the Pan-Africanists, to fulfill the goals of the African Union, of the Organization of African Unity and the African Union constituent instruments. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today.